Welcome to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the inner and outer tie rods on a 2011 to 2019 Ford Explorer. This one is a 2015, so depending on your year, it may look slightly different, but the concept is going to be the same. So the first thing you need to do is get the thing jacked up here, and for the sake of this video, I'm just going to assume that you know how to do that and do it safely. And obviously, we need to get our wheels off too. And one thing I want to mention before anybody else does in the comments, you'll notice that the sway bar end link is missing here, and I just want to let you guys know that that is not required to remove that to do any of this that we're about to do. I just have that off because I'm already replacing them while I'm in here, and I have a video on that as well, linked in the description. But for this part of the repair, you do not need to remove that, just ignore the fact that it's missing. So the first thing you'll probably want to do is to loosen this jam nut here, especially if you're only replacing the outer one. If you're replacing both the inner and outer, you don't necessarily have to. You can just take it off as an assembly. And a 13/16 fits pretty well on there. Should be 21 millimeter. And depending on where you live, like I live in the Salt Belt, it's probably going to be pretty freaking tight. There we go. And it might end up spinning the inner tie rod as well. So if you're only replacing the outer, I mean, I got it loose. You could probably just leave it where it's at as long as they're the same length. But you may need to hold on to this too while you loosen this up. And if you want to go that route, a 13 millimeter is going to be the best fit on that. There, it's broke loose. So if you're only replacing the outer, you don't want to move this nut a whole lot. That way you can unscrew your old one off of it and then screw your new one on right up to that nut and then just snug it up. And that'll get you close enough to at least get you to an alignment shop. Next, we'll want to take this nut off here, and that's going to be a 21 millimeter. If you're lucky, it'll zip right off. We'll see if I'm lucky. Nope. Expect that, especially, again, if you live in the Salt Belt. Now, if that happens, which it probably will, I even sprayed this with penetrating oil last night, but this is a 10 millimeter on top. It's going to fit pretty dang tight. You may need to hammer the socket on or use a wrench. I'd recommend a 6-point socket, though, because a 12-point, I've had it to where these round off. Nice and rusty. And what we're going to do is put a ratchet in to tighten things up. And then you can either push on the wrench here and try to turn it to the left, or you can, if it's not too bad, you might be able to get it with the ratchet. Oof! I highly doubt this is going to work, but I'm going to try it. Oh, it's actually going. Try running it back and forth a few times, maybe. Oh, holy shit, that's hot. I've just got these little vice grips here locked onto the bottom of the shaft down there. All right. So the other one, I literally had to cut it off because it just wouldn't budge. And what I did was I just took my angle grinder with a cutoff wheel and just cut just above, like where it, like right in that corner right here on the nut. That's probably stupid hot. Probably shouldn't touch that. But that little corner right there where it's like starts going up to the flats, I just cut most of the way through and then just hit it with a hammer and knocked it off. And then that little ring that was left on there, I just cut a little notch in it to where I could get a punch on it or a chisel, and then just kind of spun it the rest of the way off. And it came off pretty easy that way. Thankfully, I didn't have to do that on this one. So now at this point, if you're only doing the outer tie rods, unscrew your outer tie rod from your inner one and screw your new one on and just put everything back together, which I'll show you that. I'll put a time on the screen if that's all you're doing for you to skip ahead to for the reassembly of this part. Now, if you're doing the inners as well, next thing we need to do is take this clamp off, and there's another clamp up there that we need to take off, and then we'll get our boot slid back. But this clamp, obviously, just a pair of pliers. And then for the clamp back here, just take a screwdriver in here and just pretty much break it off. There we go. Now, I like to pull the boot off here while everything's still attached. It just makes it easier because everything's just kind of solid, not flopping around on us. And these can be rather difficult to get out because this actually sits down into like a little groove in the tie rod end here. So you got to pull pretty hard on it. That came off surprisingly easy. Trying to fix that. Oh, we got it there. There. And Ford does recommend replacing these. Ford's also in the business of selling parts. I never do unless they're damaged. So unless you've got a cut or a tear or something in yours, just reuse it. It's fine. And now what I like to do is, I'll just take my knee or something and hold this up here. And then I get a measurement from back here, like the back side of it, up to somewhere in here, either the opposite side or the center, however you want to do it. Just get a measurement on how long this is roughly. That way when we put everything back together, it'll at least get us within the ballpark of where it needs to be. And I've already measured mine, and it's roughly 14 1/8. I'm going to take another look at it here, but yours may be a little different, but it should be somewhere in that neighborhood. So now at this point, you've got two different options. You can just unscrew the outer tie rod here and then, separate these two, or you can pop this out and take the whole thing out as an assembly. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and unscrew the outer tie rod here, just so it's out of the way when I'm unscrewing the inner from the steering rack. Doesn't really matter which way you do it, just whichever way you feel like doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this jam nut off too while I'm here, and then also the boot, and that way it just kind of protects the boot from getting damaged when I'm doing other stuff in here. Next, we'll loosen our inner tie rod from the steering rack. I'm not really sure what size wrench you're going to need to take that off. I have them up to 1 5/16", and that was not big enough. So there's several different other tools you can use. I've got this style here, this little U-bolt style. Seems to work pretty all right. So we'll go ahead and get that put on there and get that loosened up. And if you're using this style, if you put your lever, like your breaker bar or whatever, to the right, kind of go with it, you'll give yourself a lot more torque than if you go, say, have your breaker bar going this way and trying to twist it like that. You can give yourself an extra inch or more of leverage there. And these things can be rather stubborn. About knocked my beer over on that one. There you can see it's loose. I'm going to go ahead and take that tool off, and then we can unthread it by hand. Depending on what kind of tools you're working with to get those inner tie rods off, it may be beneficial for you to go ahead and just disconnect the sway bar links on each end. Just the top is the easiest one. You can just disconnect it and allow you to move the sway bar up and down just to get it out of your way. And if you do remove that, it's 21 millimeter or 13/16, and then you can just shove it out of the way. If you care, when you put it back together, the torque spec for it is 111 foot-pounds. Now that that's off, you want to come in here and take a look. So you can see inside here, along this outer rim here, there's this little ring, looks like a washer. Inspect that really good and make sure it's in good shape, because these things are known to come apart. I think a lot of it depends on the driving style. If you're hitting the steering lock and hitting it pretty hard, then you can actually damage these, and they just didn't make these things strong enough to be able to withstand that kind of use for very long. This one's in good shape. I don't mind leaving that in there. But when you come over to the passenger side, you can see on mine here that ring is not there, and that's because it was completely destroyed. There was complaints of popping when turning, and what happens is that ring ends up getting caught on the little spiral part of this, and then when you pull the steering wheel to the right, it brings this side in, and that washer will be kind of hung up on here, and it'll bind up inside of there. When it pops loose, that's that popping sound that you hear. And here's what's left of it. There was all kinds of little rubber bits inside of there that I had to wipe out of there. Yeah, this thing is like mangled. You can try to find new ones of these. If I can find a part number for these, I'll put it on the screen. But last I knew, they didn't sell just these. And pretty much the only real fix for it was to replace the entire steering rack. And Ford wants a lot of money for that, of course. The other option is to just take the pieces out here and just leave it go. Just if you do that route, make sure you're real careful when you're driving. Make sure you don't slam the steering wheel up against the lock. You could end up damaging the steering rack. That's what that piece is for, is to prevent that. I mean, if you bump up against it a little bit, you'll be fine, but don't aggressively slam the steering up against the lock. And just be mindful of that, and anybody that drives your car, make sure they're aware of that. But other than that, the only other issue you might have is if you turn it all the way, you might get a little rubbing on your inner fender here, or you might get on the control arm a little bit. And if you're anything like me, you've been driving trucks with too big of tires for years, so you're used to just not going up against the lock very hard. You may need to adjust your driving style slightly, but I would rather do that than replace the entire freaking steering rack. I went ahead and pulled one off on this side just to take a look at it, and it looks serviceable. I'm just going to stick it back in there and hope that it doesn't come apart on me, but at least if it does come apart on this side, it doesn't have the little corkscrew like it does on the other side, so it's not really going to bind up like it did on the other side. So just stick that right back in there and call her good. So now we'll just take our new tie rod here, our inner, thread that in. And now I'll get my tool put back on here. And an important part with this, make sure you pay attention to how this is oriented for when you torque it down. Unless you're just hand snugging it, then there's that. But if you want to actually put a torque wrench on it like I'm going to do, since I'm going to have the torque wrench to the right side here and I'm going to be pushing down on it, I want this pointed straight up and down. And the reason for that is, if I have it like this and I torque out here, that throws my center line off on my torque spec. So if I torque it to the 66 foot-pounds that this calls for, with it sitting like this, I'm actually applying, I'd have to do the math, but significantly more because I'm that far, about, 6 inches, 8 inches or so from the center line. But when we turn it up like this, the torque is over here and it evens out. So this works with crow's foot wrenches too. If you're using a torque wrench on them, you want to apply your torque at 90 degrees rather than like this, or if we go like that and torque from the right, we're actually lowering our torque value. Ideally, I'd rather not use this type of tool on the brand new tie rod end, but the thing is, it's not, even if it does mar it up a little bit, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. So I guess I'm just being overly picky worrying about it. And since I am using a crap load of extension to get out a little further, I'm going to go up just a couple foot-pounds just to account for any flex that's in here. I'm using 1/2-inch drive extensions here, so the torque loss won't be much. So I'm maybe going to go to like 68. I don't want to overdo it. Now we'll install our boot. feel it snap into its spot. And then back there, just shove it on, make sure it's fully seated. Get this clamp put on. Now for our clamp up here, Ford of course says to use just the factory style clamp, but I don't have the tools for that, and most people don't. I work on cars all the time and I still don't have the stuff for that stupid type of clamp. You can use zip ties. I don't really recommend it. Of course, Ford says that it needs to be an airtight seal, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just gonna end up putting on a worm gear type clamp, just a regular hose clamp. There we go, brand used clamp installed. That ain't going anywhere. Probably more airtight than the original. So if you skip the inner tie rod part, you can be rejoining us about now. And now what I'm gonna do is thread on our new jam nut. Optional, I guess, if you're only replacing the outers. Then grab our new outer joint, preferably greasable. Get greasable ones. Non-greasable ones suck. They don't last. I mean, this Explorer has 87,000 miles on it, and the one was already shot. So, get greasable. And then we'll just thread our new one on. And I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have put that clamp on there yet so I could get my measurement. Stand by. So now, what we'll do, get this slid up in there. And I'm not threading this on all the way, just enough to hold it in case I drop it. So now what we'll do, push this up in there, and we'll get our measurement from back here to up here again. And you guys are currently where I need to be, so I'm doing that off camera. So I'm actually really freaking close to where I need to be. Just some minor adjustment needed. And all you need to do, of course I just knocked the tape off, but when you want to make your adjustments, you can just turn this one way or the other to extend it to where it needs to go, or retract it, whatever the case may be. And it doesn't take much to go too far, like I keep doing. Alright, I am right there at that 14 1/8 that I needed to be. So now we can get our boot put back where it belongs. And torque this down to 111 foot-pounds. Now you can go ahead and install your grease zerks if you haven't done so already, and then go ahead and give them their initial pumps of grease, because these don't come with enough grease in them out of the factory. So I always do an initial greasing, basically just kind of pump them up until you just start to see the boot move a little bit, and then you're good. I know having greasable components just sounds like you're adding more work for yourself, but here's my thing. Every time I do an oil change, I also do a tire rotation. And since the tires are off, all these grease zerks are easily accessible. I would rather spend an extra probably 5 minutes tops coming around here with a grease gun and hitting these grease zerks every time I do an oil change every, 5, 8, 10,000 miles, whatever we end up doing on this, rather than spend several hours having to replace these components later on down the road. I can tell you from experience, greasable components last a lot longer. I've had the same ball joints, tie rods, basically the whole suspension on my work truck that pretty much gets the crap beat out of it. I have personally put over 200,000 miles on that truck, and I've never replaced any of those components. But I grease them at every oil change, which is every 10,000 miles on that truck. I promise you, you will not find non-greasable components that'll last nearly that long. Next, we can get our wheels put back on. Next, what you want to do is make sure the steering wheel is at least reasonably straight. And looks like we got it there right now. Then we'll come up to the front and we'll pick a wheel. We'll say this one. This one looks a little straighter to me than the other one. And we're going to use this here as a reference point. And then we're going to grab our tape measure and we're going to check our alignment. And it doesn't have to be perfect as long as you plan on doing the right thing and going to an alignment shop shortly after you do this repair. And then what we're going to do is just pick a tread on the tire. It doesn't really matter which one. Like I'll probably just do probably this inside one here. and then we'll go to the inside on the other side, and we're going to take a measurement from this tread on this tire to the other one on the front, and then we'll go around to the rear of the tire and then take a measurement from that same tread block across and see how far out they are, and then adjust the tie rods as needed to get those pretty close so we don't just completely ruin our tires on the way to the alignment shop. And I'm going to do that off camera. I think my explanation's close enough, and we're not getting scientific here. As long as it's pretty dang close, within a quarter inch or so from the front of the tire to the rear, that's good enough to go, 10, 15, 20 miles, whatever it takes to get to the alignment shop. Also keep in mind that since we're off the ground right now, that's going to somewhat change the alignment values. So again, it's still not going to be perfect. Now I just measured, and I'm about roughly 3/4 of an inch off front to back. I've got a little bit of toe out going on. So what I need to do is bring the back of the wheel out, which means I'm going to unscrew this tie rod on this side here just a little bit, maybe, I don't know, a couple turns, and then we'll remeasure and see what happens. And when you're doing this, it doesn't take much, and it's really easy to go too far because, whatever you subtract from one side gets added to the other side or vice versa. If you're an inch off and you move the rear of the tire whatever direction it needs to go a half inch, that means your front's going to be also moving a half inch in the opposite direction, or close to it, depending on where you got your measurements. But like I said, this isn't scientific. And you figure the thread pitch on there, plus angles, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go into too much detail, so I'm just going to stop and do it. Well, I did pretty decent. I got it at 61.5 front and rear, so we're pretty much dead even. And then once you get things super close, go ahead and snug up your jam nuts on your tie rod ends. That way they stay put going down the road till you get to the alignment shop. Now we can get her back down on the ground and torque our lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. In a cross pattern, of course, like I just did. And then I like to go through and check them one more time. And then make sure that within about 50 to 100 miles, you recheck your lug nut torque here. And if any of them move when you recheck them, you'll need to check them again at another 50 to 100 miles and keep doing that until they don't move when you recheck them. I know it sounds stupid, but it sucks having a wheel almost come off on you at 60 miles an hour. It's happened to me because I neglected to do that step. And now that you've got everything together, there's only 2 steps left. And you can do them in whichever order makes sense depending on what time of day it is and what time your alignment appointment is. But obviously one of those steps is to go and get your alignment done. And the other one, which is probably the most important step, celebration beer. If this video helped you, you can help it help other people by hitting the like button. That tells the YouTube algorithm that this video should be shown to more people. Also, consider hitting the subscribe button. That lets me know personally that you like the content that you're seeing and you'd like to potentially see more of it. Every now and then I throw in a little destruction as well. And if you're subscribed, you get notifications for that stuff. So with that said, thanks for watching, and I hope this video helped you out. Well, I'm on my way to the alignment shop / test drive, and everything seems to be working well. And I think I got my alignment pretty dang close. I mean, the steering wheel's off a little bit, but I let go of the wheel, and this road's not perfectly even or anything, but I'm not touching the wheel, and it ain't pulling at all. So I think I got that alignment pretty spot on. So we'll see what the paper says once I get done at the alignment shop. That'll be interesting. And this picture here is when I first showed up to the alignment shop there. This is the initial readings. And you can tell that both wheels were off to the right by looking at the arrows there, which is pretty obvious based on the fact that I had to hold the wheel to the left in order to go straight. So I was off on that. But if you look at the total difference between the left and right wheels, the toe on it, I was off by 0.15 degrees total toe. So, I mean, that's close. And that explains why it didn't pull one way or the other going down the road. because those tires, as far as the alignment between each other, their relationship to each other, they were almost spot on. Like, they were within spec. They were just off in relation to the steering wheel. So you can actually get it pretty close with a tape measure if you actually take some time with it